In this lesson, we'll discuss some of the basics of material application within Softimage. Okay, now when it comes to material application, just like a lot of the things that we've already had a chance to look at in Softimage, there are actually several ways that we could go about this. So what we'll do in this lesson is explore a couple of those different options, and that way you can actually start to choose which method is going to work best for you. So one method that we have, and this is probably one of the most straightforward methods, is to just simply select an object, and then under our Get menu, we can go to Get Material, and then choose any of our material types. Now, we're really not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about each one of these different materials because there is a lot of content here to talk about. But for now, let's just keep in mind that the two basic materials that we're probably going to be using most frequently are the Fong and the Blend. So the Fong is going to be good for more shiny, more polished metal, whereas the Blend is going to be good for sort of dull, a little less reflective metal, so whichever one of these you want to choose. Now, if you do want to learn more about these different types of materials and just what makes each one of these unique, we actually do discuss these as part of our Render Tree Reference Library course. So after you've had a chance to go through this course, again, if you want to learn more about some of these different material types, these are just one of the many, many things that we do talk about, again, in our Render Tree Reference Library course. Okay, now, if we want to assign a certain material to multiple objects, typically our first inclination would be to select all the objects that we want and then try to assign a material. Now, we don't actually want to do this because what's going to happen is instead of Softimage actually applying one material to all three of these objects, we're actually going to get a unique material assigned to all three of these. So we're going to wind up with three different materials. So whenever using this method, what you want to do is make absolutely certain that you only have one object selected. So let's go to Get Material, and in our case we'll use something like a Fong. Alright, and now we can come in and choose a color for this. So let's go ahead and maybe choose kind of a darker brown color. So in addition to using these color sliders over here, we can also switch this to something like a color wheel if we find that a little bit easier to work with. So here we can come in and choose sort of a darker brown color for ourselves, sort of a copperish color is what I'm going for. And once we have that set, go ahead and close that out. So now we have one object in our scene that has the material that we want. Now what we can do is take all the other objects in our scene that we want to have that same material. Let's go ahead and shift select those. And now we can go up to Get Material and Assign Material. Now at this point we have a picking session. Now Softimage is basically asking us what is the material that we want to steal and apply to these other objects. So we're going to click on this object that we want to steal the material off of, and now you can see we have that same material that's been applied to all three of these objects. Now in this case, this is what we want. So we only have one material in our scene, but it is now being shared between three different objects. Okay, so this is one method that we have for actually assigning and creating our materials to actually use this menu up here. Now, one method that you might find a little bit easier and a little bit more straightforward is to actually use something called the Material Manager. Now, the Material Manager can be found within Softimage if we go to View, Rendering and Texturing, and choose the Material Manager. We can also use the keyboard shortcut, which is going to be Control-7. So if you click on the Material Manager, we actually have the ability to come in here and see all of the materials that make up our scene. And this is actually a little bit more visual way of actually looking at this. So within this we can see that we have things like these little check boxes in the corner of these little swatches. So this again represents all the materials that are currently in our scene. If we see these little check boxes, that means that this is material that is currently being used on one of our objects. You can see that some of these materials don't have that same little checkbox, which means it's basically a material that has been created but is not currently being used. And you may run into this situation pretty frequently as you start to create materials and maybe override those and assign materials to different objects. You may wind up with materials that are not being used. And again, this is a very, very easy, very visual way of finding that out. So to clear out any unused materials, what we should be able to do is just go up to Materials and delete Unused Material. There we are. So now what we can do is scroll down, and you can see that we have things like our material that we just created here. So again, we could come in If we wanted to make our materials from scratch, we have this same little pull-down menu over here that we had over here on our Get Material menu. But again, this might be a little bit easier and a little bit more straightforward, because here we can just come in, just simply select any objects that we want to have this material assigned to, and I'm just coming in and shift clicking on these objects. And now with these selected, we can just take our material, click, and drag it onto the objects that we want. Right? And as you start to work with your materials, you'll probably find it to be a good idea to continuously come in here and start to rename your materials as you start to create those. So we can come in here and just right click, rename, and now we can name this whatever we want. So we can call this something like, let's say ship body accents. Let's actually try to rename that again. So we can call that ship underscore body underscore accents. Press enter, and there we are. So also looks like I'm having a kind of a hard time spelling here. So I'll make sure to come in and fix that before we start up on our next lesson. So you'll notice that this area down here, this is the area that we call our render tree. So this is an area that we'll start to get pretty familiar with as we begin moving a little bit further through some of these lessons. And we'll start to see where this is really used as a very, very integral part of Softimage when it comes to actually assigning things like textures, maps, and things like that. So that's a look at a couple of different methods that we have within Softimage of actually applying our materials to various parts of our objects.